By 9:30 that morning, my husband had suspended me in front of 50 employees. By sunrise the next day, I owned his company. He never understood the difference between humiliation and surrender. That was his first mistake. The email came at 8:12 a.m. Mandatory all-hands meeting. Conference room A. Attendance required. No explanation. No agenda. That should have warned me. When you live with a man who believes power is performance, you learn to hear the drum roll before the speech. I walked into the office like I always did. Quiet, prepared, invisible in ways that made him comfortable. That, too, was learned behavior. The room was full. Too full. Executives standing along the walls. Assistants seated stiffly. The glass walls exposed us to the rest of the floor like a display case. He stood at the head of the table. My husband. The CEO. The man who still corrected me at home when I used the wrong fork. He didn't look at me when I sat down. That was deliberate. He waited until the room settled, until the silence grew heavy enough to feel intentional. Then he spoke. "As of this morning," he said, voice calm, practiced, "I've made the difficult decision to suspend Margaret from her operational role, effective immediately." He used my full name. He never did that unless he wanted distance. The room didn't move, not a breath, not a blink. "For the sake of transparency," he continued, "this is due to concerns regarding judgment, professionalism, and internal boundaries." That word, boundaries, hung in the air like a joke no one laughed at. I didn't look at him. I looked at the faces around the table instead. Shock, confusion, and something else, buried deeper. Recognition. He finally turned toward me, offering the version of sympathy he used when cameras were on. "This isn't personal," he said. I almost smiled, because it was nothing but personal. "This is a temporary measure," he added, as if generosity might soften the blade. "Margaret will be escorted out today while we conduct a full internal review." Escorted. I'd helped build this company from a rented floor and a folding table. I'd written policy, hired staff, negotiated contracts he later took credit for. And now he was dismissing me like a risk exposure. I felt 50 sets of eyes slide toward me, careful not to linger too long. People are loyal to stability, not truth. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to remind them I was still there. "You're suspending me," I said evenly, "without cause, documentation, or board approval." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "This meeting is not a debate," he replied. "I agree," I said. "It's a performance." That earned a few sharp inhales. He hated when I named things. "I'll cooperate," I continued, collecting my notebook. "But you should understand something before we proceed." He raised an eyebrow, amused, indulgent. "You don't remove someone from power by embarrassing them," I said. "You do it by outthinking them." The room froze. He smiled then, the small, private smile he used when he thought he'd already won. "Security," he said. 2 men appeared at the door. I didn't resist. I didn't argue. I didn't look back. Because I already knew something he didn't. This company wasn't his the way he believed it was, and the paperwork was about to matter more than his voice ever had. In the elevator, one of the guards avoided my eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he muttered. I nodded. Not because I accepted it, because I understood it. Outside, the morning air felt sharp, cold, real. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. A text. From him. "We'll discuss this at home. Don't make it worse." I deleted it. Then I opened my calendar. Then my files. Then the documents I'd kept quiet about for years. He thought he'd removed me. What he'd actually done was give me time. And by the time he realized the difference, there would be nothing left for him to take back. Suspension is supposed to feel like exile. It's meant to make you small. What it actually gives you is silence. No meetings, no interruptions. No one leaning in your doorway to just grab 5 minutes. No husband calling from his corner office to remind you who signs the checks. Just time. And time is dangerous when a woman finally uses it honestly. I didn't go home. That mattered. If I'd walked through the front door that morning, he would have framed the story for me. Calm voice, reasonable tone, concern dressed as authority. He would have explained why this was necessary, why I had forced his hand. I knew the script. I'd lived inside it for years. Instead, I drove to the condo he didn't know about, the one I kept after selling my first firm, the one he called sentimental clutter and never bothered to inspect. He thought I'd folded my life into his. I hadn't. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. Not the work one. Mine. The first file I opened wasn't legal. It was personal. A folder labeled incidents, dates, times, emails forwarded to myself, calendar invites that never made sense, revisions he overrode, then blamed me for, meetings where decisions shifted after private conversations I wasn't invited into. At the time, I'd told myself it was marriage, compromise, corporate politics. That's how control works. It teaches you to rename it. I poured coffee and opened the second folder. Ownership. That was the one he'd never asked about, because men like him don't double-check what they believe they already understand. The company started before the marriage. Barely. But legally, that mattered. The early funding rounds were structured fast and sloppy, built on trust and momentum. My name was everywhere in the foundational documents. Then came the amendments, the quiet ones, the ones I'd insisted on when he was too busy expanding to read closely. Just risk management, I'd said at the time. He'd kissed my forehead and told me I worried too much. I smiled now. He'd signed more than he realized. By noon, I had a legal pad filled edge to edge. Not emotions, not grievances. Facts. At 1:30, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. At 2, again. At 3, a text. You're being dramatic. Come home. I blocked the number. That was new for me. Not the blocking. The lack of guilt. At 4, I called an attorney. Not the one we shared. That would have been foolish. I called the woman who handled my first exit years ago. The one who never smiled unless she was about to win. She answered on the second ring. Tell me everything, she said. I did. I told her about the suspension, the public nature of it, the lack of board notice, the phrasing he'd used, the escort. I heard her inhale slowly. He overplayed, she said. Yes, I replied. He always does. We went quiet while she reviewed the documents I sent. Minutes passed. Then, Margaret. Yes. Do you understand that as it stands, you're not just protected? I waited. You're positioned. That word landed cleanly. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For years, I'd been told I was emotional, reactive, difficult when pressed. What I was, what I had always been, was prepared. He didn't cheat on me because he was lonely. He cheated because he was careless. Men like him believe power is permanent. They confuse attention with loyalty. They assume silence means agreement. At 6, I finally checked my email. The internal announcement had gone out, carefully worded, sanitized, framed as leadership responsibility. No mention of my contributions. No acknowledgement of history. Just absence. I forwarded it to my attorney. Then I forwarded it to myself. Documentation isn't dramatic. It's patient. At 8, there was a knock at the door. I didn't open it. I knew who it was. His car had a particular idol, a habit of presence. Maggie? He called through the door. He hadn't used that name in years. I know you're in there. Silence is instructional. I let it teach him something. We don't have to do this, he said, voice lowering. You're making it worse. I finally spoke. No, I said, evenly. You did. Another pause. Then irritation crept in. You embarrassed me today. There it was. Not us. Not me. Him. I walked to the door but didn't open it. You suspended me without authority, I said, in front of my staff. Our staff. You escorted me out, I continued. You implied misconduct. He scoffed. Don't exaggerate. I'm documenting, I corrected. The silence that followed was different, uncertain. You should talk to your lawyer, I added. I don't need. You do, I said. Because tomorrow, the board will. His voice sharpened. You wouldn't. I smiled to myself. I already have. I stepped away from the door. I didn't hear him leave, but I knew he would. Men like him don't linger where they aren't in control. That night, I slept deeply. Not because I was calm, because I was done being afraid of the wrong things. He thought this was about marriage. It wasn't. It was about structure. And by the time he realized how much of it rested on my name, the paper trail would be louder than his voice had ever been. Power doesn't announce itself when it shifts. It waits. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10. He didn't tell me. That was mistake number 2. I found out the way I found out about most things toward the end of our marriage, by noticing what suddenly went quiet. No calendar update, no forwarded agenda, no late-night rant about incompetent directors who don't understand vision. Silence, when you know how a man usually fills it, is information. My attorney confirmed it an hour later. They're meeting without you, she said. He's trying to define the narrative before you enter the room. I looked out the window of the condo at a city I'd once thought of as ours. He always does, I said. And? She prompted. And he forgets, I replied, that I taught him how that room works. I didn't attend the meeting. That surprised everyone, especially him. When a woman is suspended publicly, people expect her to either fight loudly or disappear completely. They don't expect restraint. They don't expect patience. They don't expect confidence. Letting him speak first was not surrender. It was strategy. He walked into that boardroom convinced he was early. He wasn't. By the time he opened his mouth, the directors already had questions. Not accusations. Questions. Those are worse. Why was a co-founder suspended without a formal vote? Why were concerns raised without documentation? Why was legal counsel not notified beforehand? Why now? I wasn't there to watch it, but I could picture it perfectly. His posture tightening, his voice sharpening, that slight tilt of his head when he believes intelligence can substitute for preparation. He would have said, "Trust me." He always did. What he didn't know was that the night before, each board member had received a neatly organized packet. No commentary, no emotion, just timelines, contracts, equity structures, and one quiet reminder embedded in footnotes and clauses. My signature appeared more often than his. At 11:43, my phone buzzed. A message from one of the directors, the only one who ever spoke to me like an equal. We need to talk. Today. I replied with a single word. Yes. An hour later, I sat across from 3 board members in a private conference room downtown. Neutral territory, glass walls, no branding. They didn't apologize. They didn't need to. "We want to understand," one of them said carefully, "how you see the situation." I folded my hands. "I see a CEO who confused authority with ownership," I said, "and a marriage he thought insulated him from governance. Another shifted uncomfortably. "This is unprecedented," someone muttered. "No," I replied. "It's just unspoken." I laid out the facts the same way I'd laid them out for my attorney. Dates, documents, language. I didn't speculate about motives. I didn't mention the affair. Not yet. When I finished, the room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Respectful quiet. "We were not aware," the chair finally said, "of the extent of your retained control." "That," I said, "is because I never needed to announce it." They exchanged looks, and then came the question he never expected them to ask me. "What do you want?" Not "what do you need?" Not "what will make this go away?" "What do you want?" I didn't answer immediately, because wanting, out loud, is dangerous if you haven't decided who you are yet. "I want the company protected," I said finally. "From volatility, from ego, from personal conflicts masquerading as leadership decisions." They nodded slowly. "And your husband?" one asked. I didn't flinch. "He can remain employed," I said, "if he can accept oversight." That landed, because it reversed everything. It stripped him of inevitability. At 3:12, he called me. I didn't answer. At 4, he texted, "We need to fix this. You blindsided me." I smiled faintly. He still thought surprise was the crime. At 5, my attorney forwarded an email. The board had requested a special session, with both of us present. Formal. Recorded. That night, he showed up at the condo again. This time, I opened the door. He looked unsettled, not angry, not smug, uncertain. "I don't understand what you think you're doing," he said, stepping inside like he still belonged there. I closed the door behind him. "I'm letting the structure speak," I said. "You're trying to humiliate me." I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "I already know how that feels. I'm not interested in repeating it." He scoffed, but there was fear underneath it. "You think the board will choose you over me?" he asked. "I think," I said, "they'll choose stability over spectacle." He laughed, sharp and brittle. "You don't have the stomach for this." That was when I understood something essential. He still believed I was motivated by pain, by betrayal, by marriage. He didn't realize I'd already moved past all of that. "This isn't about stomach," I said. "It's about spine." He left shortly after. No slam, no threat, just retreat. The next morning, the agenda for the special session arrived in my inbox. Item 1, Review of Suspension Procedure. Item 2, Clarification of Ownership and Authority. Item 3, Interim Leadership Structure. Interim. I closed the email and took a breath. This was the moment where stories usually turn dramatic. Tears, showdowns, vindication speeches. None of that was coming, because real power changes hands quietly. And when the boardroom finally fell silent, it wasn't because no one had anything to say. It was because, for the first time, everyone was listening to the right person. There's a moment, quiet, almost boring, when love stops being relevant. It doesn't arrive with shouting or tears. It shows up as paperwork. The special session was scheduled for Monday. Neutral location. Outside counsel present. That alone told me everything. Boards don't invite lawyers unless someone is about to lose leverage. He arrived early. Of course he did. Sat at the head of the table out of habit, not authority. When I walked in, he stood. That was new. "Margaret," he said, "careful now. We should talk before this starts." I set my bag down. "We are," I replied. The chair cleared his throat. "Let's begin." No pleasantries, no easing in. Straight to item 1, the suspension. The outside counsel asked him to explain his decision-making process. Slowly, In detail. On record. He spoke well. He always did. Concern, risk mitigation, internal boundaries. All the words that sound reasonable until you ask where they came from. And the documentation? Counsel asked. He paused. There were verbal reports. From whom? Another pause. Internal leadership. Names? Silence. I didn't look at him. I watched the board. They weren't angry. They were recalibrating. Item 2. Ownership. This was where marriages go to die. My attorney spoke this time. Calm. Surgical. She walked them through the structure he'd never bothered to revisit after the wedding. The clauses he'd dismissed as old framework. The voting thresholds. The veto power. Then she slid one page across the table. The marital agreement. Not the romantic kind. The enforceable kind. The room shifted. That provision, the chair said carefully, states that spousal conflict impacting governance triggers an automatic review of executive authority. Yes, my attorney replied, inserted during the Series B restructuring. He turned toward me sharply. You said that was boilerplate. I met his gaze. It was, I said. For me. His face changed then, not rage, calculation breaking down. Marriage to him had always been insulation, a shield, a narrative. The board didn't see a husband and wife. They saw a liability. Item 3. Interim leadership. This was the part he'd assumed was theater. The chair spoke again. Given the procedural concerns and the unresolved conflict of interest, we're proposing a temporary reassignment of executive authority. He leaned forward. This is absurd, he said. I am the company. That was the sentence that sealed it. No one corrected him. They didn't need to. The vote was called. Formal. Recorded. He looked around the table, searching for familiarity, for loyalty. What he found was compliance. When it was done, the chair turned to me. Effective immediately, he said. You will assume interim control pending final review. Interim. He exhaled sharply. You can't do this, he said, standing. She's my wife. Outside counsel answered before I could. Sir, she said evenly. In this room, she's a co-founder with superior retained authority. I gathered my things. He stared at me like I'd changed languages. In a way, I had. Outside, in the hallway, he caught up to me. You planned this, he said, low. You waited. Yes, I replied. You used our marriage against me. No, I said. You did. He laughed, short and bitter. So what now? He asked. You take everything? I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who thought love meant immunity. No, I said. I take responsibility. He scoffed. You always wanted control. I shook my head. I wanted structure, I said. You wanted applause. That night, I removed my wedding ring. Not dramatically, not ceremonially. I set it beside the company seal in my desk drawer. Both were symbols. Only one still mattered. By morning, the company didn't feel like his anymore. And the marriage had already been over. People misunderstand control. They think it's loud. They think it's fists on tables and raised voices. Real control is quieter than that. It teaches you to adjust yourself before you ever think to resist. My husband didn't break me. He trained me. That's the part that took me the longest to say out loud. When we met, I already had a spine. I had a business, opinions, a life that didn't orbit him. That was what attracted him. Men like him don't want weak women. They want strong ones they can slowly resize. He never told me no outright. He said things like, "Do you really want to deal with that stress?" "Let me handle it," I'm better at these conversations. You're so much more effective when you're not emotional. Each sentence sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a cage. I watched myself change without ever feeling forced. I started double-checking my tone before speaking in meetings. I stopped interrupting, even when I was right. I learned when to let him finish the thought so it could still be his. At home, it was subtler. He reorganized my time under the guise of efficiency. He praised my flexibility when I canceled plans. He framed dependence as partnership. "You don't need to carry that," he'd say, already taking it from me. And I let him. Not because I was weak, because I was tired, because compromise is a beautiful word until it only moves in one direction. By the time we married, I was fluent in anticipation. I knew what would irritate him before he did. I knew which disagreements weren't worth the cost. I knew how to make myself smaller without disappearing completely. That's the sweet spot men like him aim for. Present. Useful. Quiet. What he never understood was that in learning his system, I mastered it. Every boundary he pushed taught me where the structure flexed. Every override showed me which rules mattered and which were theater. Every "let me handle it" revealed exactly how things were handled. I wasn't shrinking. I was studying. When he began grooming the company in his image, faster growth, louder presence, more risk, I watched closely. I asked questions disguised as support. I documented decisions framed as trust. I became indispensable without being threatening. That was the lesson he taught me without realizing it. Power doesn't need to announce itself if it's embedded correctly. The affair didn't shock me when I discovered it later. It clarified things. Men who need control also need reflection. Someone who sees them as impressive without requiring accountability. Someone uncomplicated. I didn't confront him. Not then. I filed it away with the rest of the information he assumed I was too emotional to keep straight. When the suspension happened, when he stood in that room and decided to punish me publicly, he thought he was reasserting dominance. What he was actually doing was confirming every pattern I'd already mapped. Control creates competence in the person who survives it. He made me patient. He made me precise. He made me impossible to rush. By the time he realized I wasn't reacting emotionally, it was already too late to intimidate me. You don't beat a man like that by becoming louder. You beat him by understanding him better than he understands himself. And the most dangerous thing he ever did was teach me how power really works while assuming I'd never use it against him. Votes are funny things. People imagine them as moments of drama, raised voices, moral speeches, last-minute conversions. That's how movies do it. In real life, the vote is decided before anyone sits down. Monday morning, I arrived early again. Not to claim space, to observe it. He wasn't there yet. That told me he was confident. Confident men are always late when they think the outcome is inevitable. I reviewed the materials one last time. Not because I needed to, because repetition calms the mind. The numbers hadn't changed overnight. The clauses hadn't softened. The thresholds were still what they were. Math doesn't care about ego. He came in 10 minutes late, jacket off, sleeves rolled. Casual authority, the posture of a man who assumes the room will wait for him. "Let's get this over with," he said lightly, taking his seat. No one laughed. That was new. The chair nodded to counsel. "We'll proceed directly to the vote," she said. "Given the documentation already reviewed, discussion has concluded." He frowned. "Hold on," he said. "I haven't responded to all of this." She met his eyes. "You've had multiple opportunities," she replied. "This is governance, not rebuttal." I watched the moment land. For the first time, he realized this wasn't a conversation he could dominate. The motion was read aloud. Clean, precise, almost dull. Temporary removal of CEO authority. Immediate reassignment of executive control. Protection clauses enacted. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're making a mistake," he said to the room. "This company exists because I built momentum." No one argued. The vote began, one by one. Quiet, formal. Yes, yes, yes. He turned toward the last undecided member, the one he'd mentored, promoted, taken credit for. "You know this is wrong," he said. The man hesitated. Then, "I know the bylaws," he replied, "and I know the risk exposure." Yes. The motion passed. Just like that. No gavel slam, no applause, just a subtle shift in posture around the table. I felt it more than I saw it. The reorientation. The way attention moved without announcement. He stood abruptly. "You're all cowards," he said. "Hiding behind procedure." Procedure didn't flinch. The chair turned to me. "You have the floor," she said. I didn't stand. I didn't need to. "This isn't a coup," I said calmly. "It's a correction." He laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You think this ends well for you?" I looked at him. "It already has," I replied. He left before the meeting adjourned. No farewell, no dignity speech, just absence. That was when I understood something important. Power doesn't scream when it's lost. It evaporates. By afternoon, the emails started. Carefully worded updates, reassurance, continuity. Employees didn't ask where he was. They asked what was next. That hurt him more than any headline ever could have. He called me that night. Blocked. He emailed. Filtered. He showed up at the office the next morning. Security escorted him to a conference room. That symmetry wasn't poetic. It was procedural. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. Because the vote he didn't see coming wasn't the one in that room. It was the one he'd lost years earlier, when he assumed I would always choose peace over preparation. Men like my husband don't accept loss. They reinterpret it. He didn't think he'd been removed. He thought I'd temporarily inconvenienced him. That distinction is where desperation begins. 3 days after the vote, I learned he'd been calling senior managers privately. Not overtly, not stupidly, just checking in. "How are you holding up?" "This interim thing. Crazy, right?" "You know this isn't permanent." He framed himself as the constant, me as the interruption. That was the coup. Quiet, unofficial, emotional. He was betting on loyalty where authority no longer existed. I let it run for 48 hours, long enough to see who answered, long enough to see who repeated his words back to me. Information always leaks when you stop pretending it won't. On Thursday morning, I called a leadership meeting. Optional attendance. No agenda. He didn't come. That told me he thought he was above it. I waited until the room settled, then spoke. "I want to be clear," I said. "There are no sides here. There is structure." Some shifted in their seats. "If anyone has been contacted privately regarding leadership changes," I continued, "now is the time to disclose it, without consequence." Silence. I nodded. "Good," I said, "because council already has the records." That did it. Phones went still. Eyes lifted. I wasn't bluffing. By noon, the board was briefed. By 1, outside counsel was involved. By 2, a formal notice was issued. Unauthorized attempts to influence governance constitute breach. Language matters. At 4, he stormed into my office. No knock. No mask. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're criminalizing conversation now?" I didn't look up from the document I was signing. "I'm documenting interference," I replied. "There's a difference. You're paranoid." "No," I said. "I'm thorough." He laughed, sharp and hollow. You think they respect you? He said. They're just afraid of lawsuits. I finally looked at him. They respect predictability, I said. You've become unpredictable. That hit him harder than any insult. This was my company, he said. You stole it. I stood then, slowly. You suspended me publicly, I said. You bypassed governance. You assumed marriage meant immunity. I stepped closer. You didn't lose the company because of me, I said quietly. You lost it because you broke the rules you thought only applied to other people. He stared at me like I'd rewritten the laws of physics. You won't keep it, he said. I'll take it back. I shook my head. You don't take back what was never secured. Security appeared at the door, not summoned. Protocol. He looked at them, then at me. For the first time, I saw it. Fear, not of me, of irrelevance. Get out, I said. They escorted him. Again. By evening, the board had voted to terminate his executive role entirely. No drama, no announcement, just a revised org chart. The attempted coup didn't fail because he lacked passion. It failed because passion is useless without position. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat alone in the office. The chair across from me, the one he used to occupy, looked smaller than I remembered. Power hadn't changed. Perspective had. People think discovery is about catching someone in the act. It isn't. It's about realizing how long the act has been running without you. I didn't go looking for the affair after the coup attempt. I already knew it existed. What I went looking for was impact. Because infidelity only matters emotionally until it touches structure. After that, it's leverage. The first confirmation came from finance. A routine review. Expense accounts flagged. Hotels that weren't client-facing. Flights booked last minute, always just under approval thresholds. Patterns. I didn't confront anyone. I never do. I asked for the raw data. Then I asked for email access. Not his. Hers. The woman he thought was invisible. She wasn't an executive. She wasn't even senior. She was convenient. And careless. She used company email for personal reassurance. She forwarded things to herself. She didn't understand retention policies. I sat alone in my office long after everyone had gone home, scrolling slowly. Not hungrily, not angrily, clinically. Miss you already. Worth the risk. She doesn't see us. That one almost made me laugh. I didn't feel betrayed. That stage had passed. What I felt was clarity. Because once you remove romance, infidelity is just misallocation of resources. Company resources. Time. Attention. Risk. I called counsel the next morning. I need parameters, I said. Not drama. She understood immediately. We pulled policy, ethics clauses, disclosure requirements. He'd violated 3 without ever touching the affair itself. That was the irony. The sex didn't matter. The secrecy did. At noon, HR was briefed. At 1, compliance. At 2, the board. No names at first, just facts. When I finally said his name, no one reacted. They already knew. That's another thing men like him never understand. Everyone knows. They just wait. By 4, the termination letter was drafted. Cause-based. Clean. No mention of marriage. No mention of emotion. Just misuse of authority and breach of fiduciary duty. He called me when he got the notice. From a number I didn't recognize. I answered. You went through my life, he said, voice tight. That's unforgivable. No, I replied. I went through the company. You used my personal relationship against me. You used company infrastructure to hide it, I corrected. That's not personal. Silence. Then, you're enjoying this. I thought about it. No, I said finally. I'm finishing it. He tried to threaten me. Legal action, public narrative, reputation. I let him talk. When he ran out of words, I said one thing. You were careful with me, I said. You weren't careful with her. The call ended shortly after. That night, I slept without interruption. Not because I'd won, because there was nothing left to uncover. Discovery doesn't hurt when you've already outgrown the lie. It just confirms that you were right to stop negotiating with it. Stripping a man like my husband doesn't happen all at once. It happens in increments so small he keeps thinking he can reverse them. First, it was access. His badge stopped working on a Tuesday morning. No announcement, no email, just a soft red light where green used to be. Security told him it was a system error. That lie wasn't for him. It was for his dignity. Then came email. Auto forward disabled. Password reset. Two-factor authentication rerouted. He still had an address. He just couldn't reach anything through it. People confuse visibility with power. They're not the same. By Wednesday, his name was gone from the website. Not scrubbed. Repositioned. Founder Emeritus. A polite way of saying historical. I didn't authorize that phrasing. Communications did. That's when I knew the shift was complete. When people stop asking what you want and start anticipating it, authority has already moved. He showed up unannounced again that afternoon. Not angry this time. Pleading. You can't erase me, he said quietly, standing in the doorway like a guest who'd overstayed the invitation. I'm not erasing you, I replied. I'm updating reality. You're enjoying watching this. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. I'm watching you meet consequences without theatrics. It's unfamiliar to you. He tried a different tactic then. Nostalgia. Do you remember the first pitch? He asked. The folding table, the bad coffee. I remember, I said. You wouldn't even be here without me. That one almost sounded like belief. You wouldn't be here at all without me, I replied. You just assumed that meant permanent ownership. His voice cracked. You're leaving me with nothing. That word again. Nothing. Men like him treat nothing as an insult, a threat, a humiliation. They never stop to ask whether it's also freedom. You have your reputation, I said. Your network, your money. My title, he snapped. My authority. I closed the folder in front of me. Those were borrowed, I said. You just forgot the terms. He stared at the desk, at the chair he no longer sat in, at the company seal now locked in a drawer he didn't have the key to. I made you, he said, almost to himself. No, I replied. You revealed me. He left without another word. By Friday, his severance package was finalized. Generous, impersonal, final. He tried to negotiate it. Counsel declined. He tried to threaten litigation. Counsel welcomed it. He didn't file. By the end of the week, his office was empty. Not cleaned out by emotion, by facilities. Plants reassigned. Books boxed. Photos cataloged and returned. The last thing removed was his nameplate. I didn't keep it. Stripping someone of power isn't cruel when it's done without malice. It's just accurate. And accuracy, I've learned, is the most unforgiving force of all. Nothing is louder than people think. It echoes. He realized it 3 weeks after he was gone, after the emails stopped, after the calls stopped, after the industry moved on without pausing to mourn him. Power creates noise. Relevance creates gravity. Nothing creates silence. He showed up where I didn't expect him to anymore. Not the office, not the condo, the cafe near the courthouse. Neutral ground, public enough to keep him controlled. I was already seated when he arrived. That unsettled him. It always had. You look well, he said, sitting across from me. I am, I replied. That wasn't cruelty. It was fact. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup like it was something warm he could still claim. They won't take my calls, he said. People I built things with. They didn't build with you, I said. They built under structure. He flinched. They think I'm toxic. They think you're unpredictable, I corrected. Toxic is emotional language. He stared at the table. I don't know who I am without it, he admitted. There it was. Not rage, not arrogance. Emptiness. Men like him don't prepare for that part. They prepare for loss as if it's temporary. Something they'll spin, recover from, outgrow. They never consider that nothing might stick. You still have options, I said. Consulting, boards, capital. But not this, he snapped. Not what I was. I held his gaze. What you were, I said, depended on other people agreeing to it. Silence settled between us. Not awkward. Final. They tell me you won't talk about me, he said quietly. I don't, I replied. Why not? I thought about it. Because speaking keeps something alive, I said. And I don't need you alive in my future. He laughed once, soft, broken. You always were colder than people thought. No, I said. I just stopped performing warmth for people who used it as leverage. He looked at me then, not as a husband, not as a rival, as someone who finally understood the cost of underestimating a woman who was paying attention. I thought you needed me, he said. I needed the space you kept trying to fill, I replied. That was the last time we spoke. Not because I banned him, not because of anger, because there was nothing left to negotiate. When a man loses power, he thinks he's lost identity. What he's actually lost is insulation. Everything else was always fragile. Victory doesn't arrive the way people imagine. There's no rush, no music, no moment where the world pauses to acknowledge what you survived. There's just quiet. The company stabilized faster than anyone expected. That surprised people. They thought he was the engine. They thought his absence would leave a vacuum. It didn't. It left room. Meetings shortened. Decisions clarified. People stopped posturing and started working. I didn't announce changes. I removed friction. That's the difference between leadership and performance. At night, when the building emptied and the lights dimmed automatically, I sometimes sat alone in the office that had once been ours. Not to mourn, to take inventory. Victory isn't intoxicating. It's sobering. Because once the fight ends, there's no adrenaline left to distract you from the truth. And the truth is this: you don't get yourself back all at once. You recover in pieces. I noticed it in small things. I stopped explaining myself preemptively. I stopped adjusting my tone to soften clarity. I stopped asking permission for decisions I was already responsible for. At home, my home now, I slept diagonally across the bed. I ate when I was hungry. I worked late without guilt and rested without apology. No one commented on my schedule. No one monitored my moods. That kind of freedom is quiet enough to miss if you don't know what you're listening for. People asked me if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Vindication is noisy. It wants witnesses. What I felt was alignment. My actions matched my values again. My words didn't have to be translated. My silence wasn't mistaken for consent. The affair came out publicly, eventually. Not because I revealed it, because people like him can't keep secrets once they lose leverage. It didn't land the way he thought it would. No scandal, no shock, just confirmation. By then, the story had already moved on without him. That's another thing no one warns you about. Justice doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like closure without ceremony. Some nights, I thought about the woman he'd been with. Not with anger, with curiosity. What version of him had she believed in? What promises had sounded convincing before they collapsed under weight? Then I stopped thinking about her too. Aftermath isn't about dwelling. It's about deciding what you carry forward. I didn't keep the bitterness. I didn't keep the fear. I didn't even keep the story the way others told it. I kept discernment. I kept precision. And I kept my name, unattached to anyone else's authority. People assume I kept the company. That's the headline version. It's neat, satisfying, easy to repeat. It's also wrong. I didn't keep the company. I released it from the mythology he wrapped around it. Ownership is a technicality. Identity is not. When everything settled, when the filings were complete, the leadership permanent, the press bored, I realized something quietly unsettling. I didn't feel anchored to the role. I felt capable of it. Those are not the same thing. I stayed long enough to finish what I'd stabilized, to ensure the culture wouldn't drift back toward performance over substance. To put people in place who didn't need my shadow to function. Then I stepped back. Not dramatically, not defiantly, intentionally. Power, when it's real, doesn't need constant contact. People asked if that meant he'd won something in the end. They misunderstand how winning works. He lost because he needed to be seen as essential. I won because I no longer needed to be seen at all. What I kept wasn't revenge. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't even the story. I kept discernment, the ability to hear a flattering tone and recognize the transaction beneath it. I kept autonomy, the right to decide without anticipating backlash. I kept my voice, the unfiltered one, the one that doesn't apologize for accuracy. I kept my boundaries intact enough that silence finally felt like rest, not punishment. And I kept myself. Not the version he preferred, not the version that adapted, the version that observed, decided, and acted without needing permission. That's what men like him never understand. You can take someone's title, you can take their platform, you can even take years of their life. But if you teach them how power actually works, if you force them to learn patience, precision, and restraint, you may be training the very thing that will end you. I didn't destroy him. I outgrew him. And there is nothing more final than that.